This is The Tea Mind with me, Erica Moore. It's a space to slow down, step out of the noise and see things a little more clearly. Some episodes are conversations about the moment that clicked and what changed afterwards. Others are shorter clarity sessions, just a few minutes to come back to yourself and think clearly in the middle of a full day. Because when the usual pace stops working and everything starts to feel a little unclear, the answer isn't more input, it's creating a moment to see what is already there. And at the end, I'll share a simple tea ritual that you can try yourself. So Sarah Philp has spent nearly 2 decades working inside education as an educational psychologist, supporting the people that are really at the forefront of our vital education system. And she's now the founder of Sorcerer Psychology, I hope I said that right, in environments that are really fast-paced, where there's lots of high pressure and you're often really stretched. She's seen what happens when there is no space to think and when everything keeps moving, but something just maybe starts to feel a little bit off. So in this conversation, we're going to be exploring the moment that things shift, maybe little moments rather than big moments, and when doing more stopped being the answer and creating space becomes essential. And we talk about what it means to live and to lead with clarity, compassion and courage, and how Sarah brings that back into her day-to-day life. Even in the busiest of systems, these small moments of reflection can change how you think, how you decide and how you show up. So I'm delighted to welcome Sarah to the Tea Mind podcast. Hi Sarah, how are you showing up today?
Hi there, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I'm just back to work after a week off. I spent a week on the Isle of Skye and then visited a friend in Cromarty, and then came back down the road. So I've had a good little break, filled with lots of outdoor stuff. So that's always good.
Lovely. It's amazing how that just makes me feel calmer and you feel,
Yes,
yeah. And
absolutely.
am I right that Skye is a special place for you?
Yes, it absolutely is. Yeah, I have various iterations of family that are from Skye, and it's a place that I visit as often as I possibly can. And something about the land on Skye, but I think also something about an island is quite a powerful thing as you go from being on mainland and heading to an island, whether that's by plane, by boat, or across a bridge. Something changes in the transition, in the process of arriving on an island, I think.
Yeah, no, that's interesting.
Mm.
Yeah, I love visiting the Outer Hebrides in Scotland,
Yeah,
and there's definitely
yeah.
something
We're
magical.
we're lucky to have many islands to visit.
We don't know how lucky we are.
Yeah.
I know we go all these far-flung holidays, but there's so much on our doorstep.
Yes, just perhaps without the weather.
So these Tea Mind conversations are looking at people's journey through life and the moment that something has clicked for them, or if it's not a particular one, big moments, maybe just small moments where you realise that you are on the right path or you need to make some changes in your life. So yeah, I'm interested about your journey. So yeah, where would you like to start?
Oh, where will I start? Um, I think for me, as you alluded to there, there was no big moment, there was no light bulb kind of experience for me, but I suppose for me, it always comes back to values and presence, and both of those things are connected. So it's about that question we ask ourselves, or we can ask ourselves often around how aligned is our life and work to our values. And perfection doesn't exist. So there will always be challenges and rub with that. But for me, it was always about coming back to, is this doing what I want it to do? Is this enough? Is this aligned enough to my core values? And my core values are service, integrity, and growth. So those are always the kind of measures or things that I use to help me make decisions and to recalibrate, I suppose, and to see where I am in relation to those at any given point in time. So there was no big moment of, hang on a second, this isn't working for me. But actually, it was just a kind of iterative process of keeping aligned with those values over time. And that will look different at different points in life for, for all of us. But I suppose I just got to a point where things kept shifting. So I was an educational psychologist, as you said, working in local authority and loved my job, still do love that job in many ways. Um, but in particular, there was a need for more growth. And that led me on to something else. And then that something else led me on to starting my own business and founding Serious Psychology. And I suppose I would never have done that if I hadn't done the bit in the middle. So for me, it was about those iterative steps that actually moved me towards something, even though I didn't know what the something was. But I
Hmm.
suppose if I look back now, perhaps I can see the beginnings of where I am now. I just didn't know that's what it was at the time. So I think it can be interesting just to reflect wherever we are, what might we be laying the foundations for in the future, even if we don't absolutely know what that thing is. We are creating the future by taking the steps we're taking now, and they might be small steps rather than leaps.
Yeah, that definitely. Can you tell me a little bit more about that bit in the middle and what did that look like and feel like?
Yeah, so I left working in local authority, which is not necessarily unusual for educational psychologists, but educational psychologists mostly work in local authority, so it's a bit unusual. And I joined an organization that was based in England and offered training across schools and multi-academy trusts in England and wanted to establish business in Scotland, which is quite a different role for me and not something I'd ever considered, but it came back to that value of growth, and actually how could I keep growing and developing my own skill set and experiences. So I suppose it took me from working in within a local authority within the public sector into a small business and having to do quite a different role in many ways, still doing lots of similar things, but also doing really very different things. And I think that gave me an insight into a part of myself and a part of my skill set, and a way of applying my skill set that I never would have considered was possible or even necessarily of interest. So it wasn't so much that I was looking for that thing, but my values guided me into that in a way. But then, interestingly, the reason for coming out of that was again back to the values that that core value of service felt too challenged and compressed in that context. And so I made the decision to start my own business and have the space and the freedom, I suppose, to honor that value of service a little bit more or in different ways, I suppose.
I'm interested in, you've talked about values a lot and you've got a lot of clarity around that. Have you always been so clear on those values?
I think I have actually. Perhaps before I would have necessarily labeled them as values, but in education, values are talked about a lot because every school will have a set of school values. So it's a familiar concept. It's a familiar term that we work with, and it's something that we use. We talk a lot about they should be used and not or lived, not laminated. We like to laminate things and put them on a wall and think that's the job done. But actually, how do we really live those values? And I suppose I, from early days, kind of worked with schools to really live those values. So it was just made sense for me to be really clear on my values as well and how those played out in the work that I did and the life that I lived alongside that. As well. And I don't think they've changed very much over the years. I think they've been fairly consistent. There's usually always a fourth one, and the fourth one probably changes a little bit over time and context. But those three have stayed really quite clear. And interestingly, it's always been something that people have given me feedback on, saying that they know what my values are from the way that I do what I do. that those values kind of are lived and threaded through how I am with people as well as what I do.
And I wonder when you are busy and life's happening all around you, what gives you that awareness to realize that maybe you need to make some steps to live more into one particular value?
It's a very vague description of things just feeling off.
Ah,
I don't think it's ever one thing, and sometimes it is a little bit of looking back. You know, it's not necessarily absolutely immediately clear that's what's going on, but sometimes it can be just that feeling something's not right. And when you look back over the last few weeks or the last few months, and you think, actually, maybe there's been a lot of giving of service in lots of different ways, and I'm not really feeling like I've got that element of growth.
mm-hmm.
Or maybe I've been too busy, attending lots of courses or trying to learn lots of different things, and I've neglected another part. And the fourth value that often is around for me is something around creativity as well. So that can look like lots of different things. Sometimes it's creativity in the work that I do and what I'm creating, but sometimes it's also creativity in perhaps more in a restorative sense of me me personally going and being creative in lots of different ways, like doing lots of crafty workshops and experiences like that. So yeah, I think it's that vague, nondescript feeling of things being off in some way.
And when you get that feeling, have you trained yourself now over the years to sort of recognize when you're feeling a little bit off?
Yeah, I think I'm naturally like that, but I think I also, part of being a psychologist and part of working as a coach is having my own supervision and my own mechanisms for these kind of things as well, so that um, I know I've got systems and processes around me as well as the things within me. So, having supervision. Um, I, there's a couple of groups that I'm a part of that is part of that loosely termed supervision, professional, personal development space, as well as the internal stuff of me just making sure that I suppose practice what I preach. It would be misaligned if I was helping everybody else have space to think and never took any space to think myself. So I do try to practice those things. And that can look like lots of different things on any given day and week. And like everybody else, there are weeks when it's harder. Practically, it's there's weeks when it's harder just internally to do these things, but that is the ebb and flow of life as well, and it's recognizing that is a part of the process.
And I'm curious with all the different people that you work with, how do you see that showing up in if they are maybe feeling a little bit misaligned with their values, and how do you sort of guide them through that process?
Um, I guess through, and I suppose in a way it mirrors what we're doing is that, it's a lot of it is about having the conversation and having the space to think or the time to think. And in the conversations I have with people, it's really about offering them that space to think. And sometimes people can talk for 10, 15, 20 minutes more without taking a breath and without needing a prompt or a question, often because we're holding a lot of stuff in our heads, but we're never actually getting the opportunity to do anything with it. So it can feel a bit like there's just a big download of stuff. And then sometimes that's all you need to be able to see it yourself. And sometimes you need questions, and sometimes you need more time and space to explore things. Um, but I guess my job is not to tell people what it is, but actually just to help them to uncover and explore that for themselves. Um, and yeah, it's a great way to spend my time.
Yeah. And have you noticed what sort of changes have you noticed over the past few years within the education setting in that sort of sphere?
Um, I think there is more and more. To quote a word that I was listening to a podcast as I was driving down the road on Sunday, and somebody was describing, the frenzy that can often be the way of working in education. Um, and they reflected, and I would reflect as well, that that frenzy doesn't necessarily mean just randomly doing stuff for the sake of doing stuff, but there is a paciness to education, and I think that's only got more so over the last few years. And I think more and more the move to having things online, which is great in so many ways, has has created a greater time pressure for educators and school leaders in particular that there's a lot of time spent in meetings online and things are squeezed in, whereas when you had to travel to every meeting it just wasn't possible, and perhaps that travel time gave people sometimes space to think and space to psychologically transition from one setting and conversation to another, whereas now we see we can use time more, but actually we're busier and we're using the time more. But is it any more effective? Is it any more useful and productive? I'm not sure that it all always is. And I think, whatever wherever you work, you have a version of that you can be very, very busy and you can keep going long past the time you might want to finish in the day. But actually, is your time being used productively? And are you doing your best work? Probably not. But I think there's almost like a momentum that gets found in education where things take on a life of their own. And there's a really strong rhythm to the school year in terms of the week, the terms, the whole year has a set rhythm and it just goes. It doesn't take a lot of gearing up. It just goes from day one and then stops at the end of June
Yeah.
for 6 weeks and then comes back again. So it's an interesting one, I think.
That is interesting because it must be. I know lots of people in education, and my husband's a primary school teacher, and I can see that pace of things is just constant.
Yeah.
And it must be really hard to build in any space or time where you can take that little pause to have
Yeah.
some time to think.
Yeah, it is. It is really difficult, and yet it is also possible as well. Um, so quite often I talk about the work of Robert Poynton and his book Do Pause. And one of the things he talks about in there is that taking a pause is an opportunity, it's a portal into a different way of experiencing your life and your work. And a pause can be of any duration. So you can take a pause in the holidays, you can take a pause at the weekend, you can take a career break and pause for even longer. But you can also pause in a breath. You can pause in a minute, in 3 minutes. And the reality is, we do all have a minute or 3 minutes at various points in the day. Um, and he gives the example of, Buddhist temples will have a plinth of wood at the door, which kind of physically creates a pause for people as they enter. And it's a reminder that because you physically have to step over the piece of wood to get in, it creates that pause, that nudge just to think, actually, how do I want to enter this space? And we have many transitions, physical and metaphorical, in a school day. And each of those, if we choose to, can offer us that moment of pause or a reminder to take that moment of pause. As you enter a room, how are you choosing to enter? Or are you kind of like running in or falling into the room? Or as you move along a corridor, how do you want to move along the corridor? And that might sound a bit um, I don't know, woo-woo or whatever it might.
Mm.
But actually, these are the habits and patterns that build the day, the week, and how we are in these spaces. So they're important to be conscious of.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what sort of like tips could you give, because this is really useful for everybody, whether it's in an
Yeah.
education setting or whether you're just going into the office or you're coming home and meeting your family and dealing with the
Mm.
rest of the evening. So what sort of tips would you give for people in those situations to sort of
Mm.
enter a space in the way that they want to enter it?
Yeah. I think it's identifying that. those transition points or those moments that can act as triggers for you to take a pause or take a breath. So doorways are quite good ones because they are literal and metaphorical at the same time. But it can even be, your journey home, your journey to work, and how do you want to use those? Because they can just be getting in the car and going, but they can also be really useful spaces, or getting on a bus or whatever, walking, however it is you do it. And I always remember working with a head teacher who said she walked to and from work and she had a point on her walk where she switched her head. So she would go from home to this point, she would think about home, and then from that point to school, she would think about school. And then she'd do the same on the way home. And that point, I can't remember what it was, on her walk just acted as a trigger. And I think it's not just thinking about the intention of doing these things, it's thinking about what do I need to put in place to help me do that? So having a trigger, whether it is getting in the car or, you know, taking off, like a name badge and a lanyard, or these packing up your bag. What are the triggers for you that you can use to help move you into that form of a pause, whatever it might be? And they're all there. So if you can, we call it habit stacking. If you can connect a new habit to something that you already do, it makes it easier for you to build that as a habit and routine. And remembering that anything that's new feels a bit clunky and weird to begin with. So it might feel a bit odd, but it's the practice that helps it to feel fluent. And before you know it, it's much easier to have that in place. Um, yeah, so finding those, I guess, triggers and movements between one space and another. And and maybe it's a question for yourself, or maybe it is just a breath. Um, we've each got our own preferences, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. For myself, try and bookend my work days with tea at the start and
Hmm.
end, and peppered
Yeah,
throughout, obviously, as well.
yeah,
But really, particularly I find the one at the end of the day useful because I use that to sort of draw a line in the sand almost,
yeah,
and reflect on what's gone well, what I've got to learn, and one thing I'm going to achieve tomorrow. So really, sort of
yeah,
drawing a line under, and then how I want to feel for the rest of the evening.
yeah, yeah.
And like you say, habit stacking that, which is why I tie things onto tea because that works for
Yes.
me because I drink so much
Yeah.
tea.
Yeah. I often encourage, three good things at the end of the day can be quite a good way to close as well, because we have a tendency to join the dots of our day and make a judgment about it was a good day or a bad day. We tend to not go too nuanced. We tend to go good or bad. It was a good day or it was a good bad day. So actually, but if you look at your day, there will be lots of dots that you can connect. And I think sometimes we tend to connect the dots of the things that weren't so good or the things we haven't done that we hoped we would do. And that's quite a common thing that I see, particularly in education, because you can have the best of intentions of what you're going to achieve in a day, but the reality is it could be something else altogether. And so we often end thinking, oh, I didn't get that thing done. But actually, if you go back and look over your day, just finding three good things from the day can be a really powerful way of just acknowledging what you have achieved and what you have experienced, despite what you may not have achieved and hoped you would at the start.
Yeah, definitely. That'd be very useful. And what other sort of themes do you find coming up time and time again in your work?
Oh, there's so many. Um, I think, as you've said, things around kind of values and time to think, well-being in general, how do we balance well-being of ourselves with the well-being of others? So, education in particular, we focus on the well-being of young people, we focus on the families and the community we have, but in order to do that, we also have to look after ourselves, and that's where there can often be quite a tension that emerges in, the trade-offs. If you're choosing to do one thing, you can't be doing the another thing at exactly the same time. So how do we make sure we attend to both? Um, I think another theme that often emerges is about our experience of time. And again, I don't think it's unique to education, but this feeling of there's not enough time to do all of the things, either that we're expected or that we want to. Um, and looking at our relationship with time and how we use the time that we have and how we feel about the time that we have. Again, in education, a lot of time is out with our control. You know, we can't choose to have a longer school day or a shorter school day or change the terms. These things are set. Um, Perfectionism comes up quite a lot, um, and how that can be both healthy and unhealthy in the work that we do. So I don't think any of these themes are unique to education, but maybe they have um, a unique lens within education because of the nature of it.
Yeah, I'm really interested, particularly in when you're talking about time. And I
Mm,
know you've had Oliver Burkeman on your podcast before,
yeah.
who has lots of interesting takes on time, which I
Yes.
wholeheartedly agree with. Perhaps you can speak
Mm.
a little bit more to that.
Yeah, I sort of alluded to it a little bit at the beginning, but you know, in education we have very set weeks and terms and what those look like. And, you know, it starts and it doesn't stop. It's a bit like I say, it's a bit like a high speed train. You see it coming and you know it's going to start. And then you know when you're on the train, it doesn't stop until you get to the other end. And where if you're, you know, working in a school or an early learning center, you're pretty much all at the same point between a holiday and the next holiday. And so there's like a momentum that feeds off that and a kind of shared narrative around that. You know, you'll often find people talking about it's only X number of weeks to the next holiday or, you know, that kind of thing. But that's because everybody's in the same cycle. There's nobody really different. If you work in an office, somebody will always be going off on holiday and somebody will always be coming back from holiday. So there's much more of a kind of um, um, just a different experience there. But one of the things that Oliver Berkman talks about is the idea that, and it's an interesting one because he says there's something powerful about everybody being off at the same time, which I think is an interesting one because in education, mostly you're all off at the same time. And his experience and his research and conversations suggest that that's actually a good thing because it allows you to switch off more. So, for example, he was relating it to people who are retired. They still find that the weekend feels different even though they're not working Monday to Friday, a weekend still feels like a weekend because it's a weekend to the majority of people, or it's that got that feel of a weekend. Um, and I think that's interesting. And I don't know that that translates in exactly the same way in education. He also talks a lot about, you know, your to-do list and how you know, how to engage with your to-do list in a way that it doesn't drive you. And I think for those in education, that's a really common thing. So many people tell me that, you know, they'll never get to the bottom of their to-do list and they won't and they feel like they are failing their to-do list all the time. And you know, again, many of us out with education can relate to that as well. But I think when you've got very fixed timelines and very fixed amount of time available to you, that can feel quite different. You know, if you're a teacher teaching all day, the amount of time you have available to action other things or prepare things is very limited. And so it can kind of um, intensify, I suppose, our experiences of time in a different way.
Yeah, that's really interesting to look at it from that perspective. And I think lots of people, whether in education or business, we put so much, we almost kind of load so much into our days and then we never
Yeah.
get through all of it. And it's constantly adding in that pressure and more pressure.
Yeah. I think I think it's important to think about the time you have available and how long things are going to take you realistically, because I think we also often, you know, set ourselves up to fail at those things because we might have something like a task that's going to take 3 hours, but we have an hour available. And yet we think we'll manage to squeeze that in somehow, or we start doing it. So we've already, you've kind of already failed before you've started. And that, is one of his points, actually. The worst has already happened. You have already failed. You will not get everything done ever. Or
Yeah.
words to that effect, I think it is, and so we have to accept, and that's what we don't like accepting, is that we are um, human beings with limitations. What's his phrase? We are, we have infinite possibilities, but we are limited human beings. That's not the right phrase. I can't remember what it is, but something along those lines of there's an infinite number of things we could be doing, but as limited human beings, we have to accept we can't do them all, and we kind of don't like that.
Yeah.
And I see that often. They say that, people often say, I'm one human being, I can only do what I can do. But secretly, they think they're going to hack that somehow and be the one that does it all.
Yeah, I think when I first heard that, when it really sort of clicked for me, it was almost a kind of relief to feel like
Mm,
actually there's no way I'm going to get everything that I want to achieve done. There's just not enough time. And it was quite liberating in a way to just
yeah,
think, well, actually, what's the one thing that I want to focus on now,
yeah,
and sort of work towards that.
yeah.
But it's
Have
difficult.
you,
I wonder why we put so much on ourselves, and why do we feel the need to achieve so much and always be going after more
yeah,
and more and more?
yeah. He uses the phrase as well, choose what you're going to fail at. What's the thing you're not going to do? What's the thing you're not going to um, do amazingly? What are you going to be rubbish at? Because I think often you know, I think I do that a little bit, even with, and I'm conscious of it, so I do try not to do it. But like I said, I quite like doing crafty type workshops and things like that. But then it doesn't mean that I have to then go and buy all of the stuff and become really good at that in my own time as well. It's okay to just go to a one-off workshop and enjoy doing that thing. I don't have to then, you know, buy all the kit and try to become good at that in some way, but we're quite good at collecting these accolades or aspirations, I think.
Yes, I have the same feeling there. And I wonder some people I wonder what makes some people more sort of, I guess, more struggle with time more than others. I think there are two camps of people. Some people that are really respectful, they get time, they kind of know how long things are going to take, and they're always on time or early for things. And then there's another camp of people that just think time doesn't apply to them, and they're late for everything, and they just pile on more and more stuff. And hands up, I'm in that latter camp. So yeah, I wonder if you've got any reasoning behind that, and or tips for people to help them be more respectful and actually understand time a little bit more.
Mm. I suppose a question I would often ask is, you know, and it goes both ways. How is that serving you? It is it serving you, and if so, how? Um, And for some people, it does serve them. I think that's the point. That's an important point to for us all to remember, is that we don't all have to be exactly the same. And some people can feel constrained if they feel they need to fit a certain way. And I think in education, that can often be a challenge, that we feel we need to be a certain way to be a head teacher, or we need to be a certain way to be strategic, for example. And I'm thinking of people who perhaps might describe them as quite creative people and the big ideas people. I suppose there's something about knowing yourself and knowing what you bring to something. So if you're great at coming up with ideas and getting started, but not necessarily then with the next part, does that serve you well enough? Do you feel okay with that? And if so, use that, but maybe recognize when you need to dial that down and dial up another part. And as a system or as a team, do we recognize and value the different things that different people bring? Because if we were all exactly the same, we'd just have a bit of an echo chamber. So it's good to have those different perspectives, different relationships with time, different creative approaches. but are we intentionally talking about how they work together? Because that's often when the rub comes, is when it secretly or not so secretly annoys somebody else that somebody is a particular way. But if we can talk about it and if we can know ourselves well, we can begin to make some of those small adjustments that serve us and serve others. But we've got to know it exists before we can do something with it. Um, and I think we all have weird relationships with time, and there's lots of common things. Like commonly, we will all, if we give ourselves 2 hours to do something, we'll take 2 hours to do it, even if it only takes 10 minutes. I see that in myself. Sometimes if I have a bit of time, more time than I thought I was going to have, say, because something cancelled or somebody wasn't available, the thing that I was going to do in the half an hour and ended up having an hour and a half for, I will take an hour and a half, even though it didn't need to take that long. So we have a tendency to fill time. Um, so the more aware, I suppose, we are about these shared human patterns with time, as well as our individual patterns with time, then we can begin to shift them and change them if we want to. We might not want to.
Yeah, I guess it's recognizing what works for you and what doesn't, and how you
Yeah,
work as part of a team and what the other people in that team are like. And yeah, I guess it all
yeah,
comes back to values as well of yourself and the organization that you're working in.
yeah. And your role and all sorts of things will influence it, Um, you know, if maybe you can't, maybe you're in a role where it's you can be as creative as you want and you're not constrained by a bell ringing at a given time in a day. But if you are in that context and you don't think about time, you're going to constantly find yourself going, "Oh my goodness, I haven't got anything done and the bell is gone." Then and so that's back to that first question of is it serving you? And in what ways is it serving you? In what ways is it not serving you? Because there will always be a bit of both as well. And it's finding that there's that sort of tipping point where something becomes unhealthy, and there's a tipping point where something unhealthy becomes healthy again, and it's finding that tipping point. And it'll be personal and it'll be contextual as well. So both of those things need to be considered as part of that.
Yeah. And I guess this all comes back to sort of having space to think as well. How do
Mm.
you personally go about finding space for yourself to think and have those really good moments of time where you can get some clarity?
I suppose I block time out for it. So I didn't do this to begin with when I started working for myself. And then I realized that it was missing. I was probably quite good at it when I was working in local authority. And then I kind of lost the structure of that. Um, and I realized actually there was something missing. So now I block 2 Fridays a month I call it a leadership day, just for want of something to call it. But it's a time when I deliberately don't put any appointments in and don't commit to things that are with other people. I might commit to my own supervision in that time or something for me within that time, but it's I guess one of the structures or systems and processes that I've put in place to try and guard some of that time. Um, that doesn't, of course, mean or guarantee that in those days I have good thinking. Because of course, good thinking doesn't necessarily happen when you plan it to happen. Um, One thing I've come to realize is car journeys are quite good for me. There's a thinking that happens when, um, this probably sounds quite bad about my driving, but when I'm somewhat occupied with something else, but not so fully occupied that I need to use all my awareness. I am very aware when I'm driving, obviously, but there's something about the headspace I think that gives me. Perhaps it's about not really being, contactable or in front of a screen. Um, so that I tend to, because I do still do a bit of traveling with the work that I do, I kind of consciously think about how I'm going to use that time when I'm traveling as part of it. So it's not, I don't see it as dead time, but I see it as time I can use in different ways. Um, and I suppose also being mindful of my own well-being and making sure I put things in place that support me in that way, because good thinking doesn't just come from having the time, but it also comes from being kind of well enough to think well, if you like. So, yeah, making sure I do the things that I need to do for that. So, well, that can look like lots of different things, but I go out for a walk at 6:30 every morning for half an hour, in all weathers and in the daylight and the darkness. Um, I go to the gym, all of those kind of things. And I guess I know that the routine of those things is important to me. And the routine will look different weeks if I'm traveling, but it's still about making sure that time is there to do those things. Um, and I do like tea, and I do part of an online tea ceremony as well, but I do like my coffee as well. So my morning coffee is a time where often that's a good thinking space for me as well.
Yeah, I
Bit of a
think
ramble.
there's definitely something around the fact if you're sort of doing something else, whether it's making tea, having your own little tea space,
Yeah,
or driving or walking. When you're doing something, I think it gives you
yeah,
that headspace to think, and I find, yeah, thoughts open up.
yeah.
Or quite often,
Mm.
if I'm driving as well, I've realised that recently I'll switch off any podcast or music and I'll just think and get my thoughts a bit more
Yeah,
clear before I
yeah,
put the podcast on again. And sometimes
yeah,
it's like 2 hours and I'm still thinking, which is
yeah.
it's don't often get that time. So it is a really good
Oh,
space.
yeah. And sometimes for me, it's the same song on repeat because the silence sometimes isn't what I need, but I don't need lots of new things coming in. So actually just one song on repeat. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I must have listened to that like a million times. But it's just that kind of background noise. A bit like people often say you can go and work in a cafe and just that background noise sometimes is enough to get you really focused or make you kind of be a bit more productive than when you're at home. So yeah, but it always comes back to knowing yourself and knowing what works for you because
Yes,
we're all different.
indeed. And have you any tips for people listening today that are looking to just get a little bit more out of their everyday? What sort of other well-being tips or tips that they can use to help themselves to get to know themselves a bit better?
Mm. There's Susie Redding who has written a lot around well-being and in various from various perspectives, but she in her book the name has just gone right out of my head. I think it's Reset, Rest, Reset. She offers 8 pillars of rest. And I can share a link with you for the show notes or something. But I think she is that's a really helpful way of thinking about what rest looks like in any given moment in time. So, for example, you might have had a very full-on, heavy, sociable day, and so rest looks like taking time alone. But equally, you may have had a day in isolation. So rest means connecting with somebody or a group of people. You might have had a day where you're sitting at a computer all day, or you might have been running around all day. So just having those moments where it actually helps you to think about what is the form of rest that I need in this moment, but also helps us to think about, and I use it a lot with educators to think about, the term ahead. If you know what your term ahead looks like and you know what you've got on, knowing that and looking at those 8 pillars, where do you think you need to prioritize the different kinds of rest or pillars of rest? So I think that's a really helpful way just to think about it doesn't mean just one thing. It doesn't mean sleep, although that is a part of it. It doesn't mean lying on the sofa watching Netflix, although again, also part of it. But it actually helps to get really nuanced and personal. Um, and the other thing I often use in workshops with educators is 3 minutes of silence because particularly in education, there is rarely a moment of silence. And there is rarely a moment that is uninterrupted as well. So 3 minutes of uninterrupted silence, not meditation, not mindfulness, but just allowing your mind, your thoughts to bubble up, to do what they need to do. Um, and whenever I do it with in a workshop, um, there's often that like energy of discomfort at the beginning where people were like, oh my goodness, sit in silence. Like that's really awkward because we never do it. Um, but about halfway through, the energy in the room always changes. So all that kind of anxious energy just starts to seep away, and I usually get people to turn it, out the way so we're not looking at each other. But I can sort of then just see that actually physically people melt a little bit more into their seat and into themselves. And often what the feedback is from that is, first of all, there's often that bit of, am I doing it right? Is that what's everybody else doing? And then the thoughts start to bubble up, which we liken to, if you put popcorn in a pan, that it starts to pop and then it gets faster and faster and faster. But then as the popcorn has popped, it obviously quietens down again. And the mind and the thoughts often follows that kind of pattern of there's like a big surge of thoughts coming up and then they settle. And often in that, people will say, they got clarity on something they didn't know they needed clarity on, or they've just feel differently about something that was bothering them. And that's all in 3 minutes, and nobody did anything. There was no intervention, no suggestion, no solution offered, but just in those 3 minutes, something changes. And I think that's I often say, let's just finish the workshop there then. That's all we need in many ways. That's all we need is 3 minutes. And we can all take 3 minutes.
Yeah, that's music to my ears. 3 minutes, yeah, cup of tea, silence.
Yeah,
But it is really amazing. Our mind is so, so powerful.
yeah,
And I think like meditation can take so many forms, but
yeah,
essentially it's just being quiet, just
yeah,
for however long. But yeah, 3 minutes is perfect.
yeah.
And yeah, something that everyone can find time to do with, time to fit into their day to day life.
Yes. We
Uh,
probably all just need to look at our screen time on our phones to realize we can definitely take 3 minutes.
yeah, I know that's the trouble these days as everything's
Yeah.
become more digital and we're just all switched on and going faster and faster. It's obviously becoming harder and harder to switch off and to take the time to actually give yourself those few minutes to actually switch
Yeah.
off.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's fascinating. And am I right? You've brought out, is it a journal or something to sort of,
Mm.
yeah, tell
Yeah,
me
so
more
I
about
have
that.
a seasonal journal for educators or anybody whose life is influenced by the educational terms and seasons. Um, and I suppose that was just it was built on experience and conversations over many years that the school academic year doesn't really follow the seasonal year in the way that it might. And so actually, how do we weave those two things together, and how do we find a way of working with the seasons and the energy and how that shifts and changes through the year, even though the expectations of us within the education system are somewhat slightly jarring with that at times. Um, and particularly, as lots of people will say during the winter, coming and going to work in the darkness and not really seeing daylight, and actually reconnecting us to the seasons. I think many educators are disconnected from the seasons, apart from maybe the season of summer, because they have a bigger holiday at that point, and so can feel they can embrace and connect with that. Um, and so the journal is designed to guide us through the seasons, through the academic year. So but it's also a bit of a planner as well. So there's space for planning as well as just for journaling and thinking about our well-being and our connection to the seasons there. And it also has got um, prompts and pauses to help us reset whether that's like a mini reset at the weekend or a bigger reset at the holidays as well, just to mark those transitions. So it's honoring both the academic and the seasonal year um, at the same time.
I love that. I love, yeah, my whole T Mind system is all about based on the Chinese five elements and how that ties into the different seasons.
Yeah.
But I've been looking recently at the Japanese have sort of they split it into 72 seasons, and I've just
Yes.
got what's it called? Nature's Calendar, which is the
Yes.
British 72
Yeah.
seasons, which is super interesting, and it just makes you more aware of what's going on around you and
Yeah. Yeah.
noticing that passage of time,
Yes.
which I think in
Yeah.
turn helps you to start to make the most of every day and to
Yeah.
maybe appreciate those three little things that have gone well today rather than
Yeah.
just focusing on the negatives all the time.
Yeah. And how can we bring the seasons into our daily life? So, it might be hard to get out and about during the week, but how can you bring the seasons in? So I often encourage people to, have a space somewhere, whether it's in their office or at home, where they shift and change with the seasons. So, I've got a little board that sits on my kitchen table. There's a story behind the board, and the things that sit on it change all of the time as a sort of reflection of um, the seasons and the things that I've been engaged in. So we can do things in lots of different ways. It doesn't necessarily mean we need to be out hiking for 8 hours every day, but actually, how can we bring the seasons into our daily life, our daily work?
Yeah, I think that's something that's sort of clear from this conversation is that it's about getting to know yourself and tailoring what you need to your specific
Yeah,
circumstances, whether you're in education or business or running your own business or whatever situation you're in.
yeah,
It's creating that space and that time to pause and to think and to build in the little habits that work for you and yeah,
yeah,
ideally stacking them onto something that you're already doing to make them
yeah,
stick.
yeah.
So if there's one little pause or a little exercise that you'd recommend for people to do in maybe in the 3 minutes that they're pausing for their tea or their coffee or whatever it is this week, what would that one exercise be?
Um, I think just notice the thoughts that bubble up. And an exercise that Oscar Trimboli, who wrote How to Listen, talks about is to ask yourself, what am I not listening to in myself? So, two options there actually. One, just notice the thoughts that come up because they are you, they are your information and your insight. So that's the very beginning of getting to know yourself better is to notice that. But secondly, that question of what is it in me that I'm not listening to or what needs to be listened to? Um, because often what we're doing, particularly in education, is listening to others. And in order to listen really well to others and to listen deeply to one another, we need to hear ourselves first. Otherwise, that will continue to interrupt and get in the way. And so both of those exercises are designed to help us listen to ourselves and therefore get to know ourselves better. And in doing so, makes us more available and present for other people as well, which education is relational practice in itself. So we always need to think not just about ourselves, but about how we show up then for the other people, whether that's children, colleagues, parents, families, the community.
Yeah, and that's fundamental in all aspects of life as well.
Yeah.
I love that. What am I not listening to?
Mm.
Definitely one to sit with a cup of tea for.
Yes.
Oh, I've loved our conversation. Is there anything that you think that we've not covered that you wish we'd covered?
Gosh, no, I don't think so. I think I was very open to wherever it took us, and it was nice to travel that journey with you.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to hear more about your journey and just how you sort of live your values every day and how you create that space to think for yourselves and also to help others have that space to think and just have that little pause. And it's super clear that your values are you sort of listen to them, listen to yourself, and notice what needs shifted every so often, just little micro changes whenever needed. And I love that phrase, lived, not laminated.
Yeah.
Yeah, getting really super clear on your values. And yeah, there's lots of good book recommendations and so on, and all your details I'll pop in the show notes. But yeah, there's so much inspiration I'll be taking away from this, and I'm sure others will as well, whether it's little habits like ending your day thinking of 3 good things that went really well, or thinking about time in a slightly different way, and just pausing and letting those thoughts bubble up, not being afraid of them, just sitting with your thoughts for a few minutes. I think that would be really, really helpful to people.
Well, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and it was lovely to talk to you.
You too.
If something in this episode stayed with you, don't try to change everything all at once. Just start with a moment. Make some tea, let it steep, take a breath, and notice what's actually there. And from there, choose whatever matters next for you. This is the Tea Mind. From presence to clarity, so you can live with intention.